Our next speaker is David Fleeting. David is a Sydney-based practitioner and author focused on turning wastewater from liability to asset. And we've been looking at his first slide for a while now. Jointly with Dr. Ian Wright, he authored the paper on Shoalhaven's reclaimed effluent management scheme. And we have an association with our neighbours and are very interested in what happens in the Shoalhaven. That paper detailed how recycled water and biosolids cut discharges to sensitive waterways while supporting dairy pasture irrigation. David's work champions practical, stakeholder-led solutions which deliver environmental and economic gains for communities. So welcome, David Fleeting.
Chris, thanks very much. So why am I here and how did this come about? I became fascinated with what we do with our wastewater some time ago. Now, it's ironic that Sydney prides itself as a water city, and yet it does a terrible job of disposing of its waste. I first moved to Bronte about 30 odd years ago, just as the deep ocean outfalls were being completed. This was a dramatic exercise in out of sight and out of mind as we shipped the waste out into the deep ocean. Surely this is a lost opportunity. Surely this is a resource. We spend so much money treating it. We've got to be able to do something better than this. And ironically, during the drought, no one was talking about reclaimed water as a possible solution. Sometimes truth is actually stranger than fiction. But I heard this guy on the radio. His name was Dr. Ian Wright, and he was saying all sorts of interesting stuff. And so I phoned him, and we started a dialogue, and it's been a terrific dialogue, and he suggested I do a PhD, and that's where we are. And it's all about a change in mindset, where you think of wastewater shifting from an environmental liability and becoming an urban asset. Also, we'd been coming to the Shoalhaven for over 30 years, and after a while I became very curious about this lilac kind of infrastructure and signage that was occurring around the place. I was genuinely intrigued. As I started to dig a bit deeper and I got involved a little bit more in some community activities down there, it turns out that this is the infrastructure associated with what is called the Shoalhaven REMS scheme. Many of you will not have heard of it, which is absolutely ridiculous because it's a world standard, excellent recycling scheme that should be shouted from the rooftops, but for some strange reason, it isn't. So what was it all about? Back in the 1990s, it was proposed to discharge wastewater into Jervis Bay. Gee, what a good idea that was. Enough is enough was the public outcry. This was actually a moment where the public was able to say, we just don't want this, you can't do it. The environment needs protecting and there must be a better way. This is a complex series of environmental ecosystems, of which the oysters, interestingly, are the canary in the mine. They will indicate anything that's wrong with the water system, and the oyster industry is shut down. Greater Nowra is a significant and complex township with a growing population, and a population that swells during the tourist season. So it goes from 30,000 to 100,000 in the tourist season. So it's a very interesting model for anything that goes on there. It's surrounded by agriculture and national park, and now is at the transition in the Shoalhaven where it's saline and the river is turning into a delta. So it's a very interesting part of the area. The REM scheme came about when 3 tiers of government were able to be on the same page, local, state and federal, and an inventive utility in Shoalhaven Water was able to say, actually, instead of discharge, we can look at something else. We can look at recycling, we can look at reclaiming that water. REM stands for RE, reclaimed, water M management scheme. Now, oddly enough, one of the first things that they needed to do was to get the public on board. I believe one of the successes of this scheme is because not for a moment did they mention potable or drinking water. It was always water associated with other applications. Now, interestingly, it was also a situation where the first thing that they said, if we're about to get this on board, we need to bring the public with us. And strangely enough, the first thing that they said to the public after telling them about what the objectives were is that we are going to up your water rates. Now, strangely enough, the public agreed with them, because if that was part of the way that they were going to stop the pollution of Jervis Bay, then they were on board. So sometimes, again, we think that things will happen, but they happen in a different way. This was a situation where the dairy farming was seen as an opportunity to utilise the reclaimed water. Even though down in that region, traditionally the dairy farms weren't irrigated, it actually saved the dairy industry from both the millennium drought and the big drought that followed, so it was incredibly timely. It was this very interesting agreement where water would provide the water, as it turns out, for free. Well, what else are they going to do? They're going to throw it away, so they might as well give it to someone. And the farmers got together in a cooperative and bought the kit. And that in itself, it was a really terminal moment. The farmers had to believe it was going to happen. Shoalhaven Water needed to believe that it was going to happen. They were all suspicious of each other's intents, but rather magically it came together. And it was interesting, I dragged Ian down there at one stage of the game, and it was right in the middle of summer. Here we were, and the cattle were eating feed that had been irrigated by the reclaimed water, but they were also being cooled down. The water was being used because it was there in abundance. Now, this was a system whereby it was evolution rather than revolution. A series of upgrades occurred. There were 11 treatment plants that were linked together. The main 2 treatment plants at Bowra were linked by an under-river pipeline. It was a very complex thing, but it wasn't a matter of ripping everything down and then starting again. It evolved on the way through, and that was the secret of its success in many respects. April 2021, the Nowra treatment plant was opened. This was the end of stage 1B. That's $150 million later, but an incredible process whereby they're able to recycle in excess of 75% of their wastewater and use it productively. Frankly, they now need to look further afield. It was made for drought-proofing. How can you use it as a perpetual thing? So once you have an abundance of water, and indeed you can think of water as being a celebratory item, it's a completely different way than we live about fearing drought, because suddenly we've got a resource from within. Putting it rather abruptly, none of us stops peeing during the drought, and isn't that handy? So there's our resource, one way or another. Urban generated water for use in civic parks and gardens, it provided a guaranteed resource for the dairy industry, and as I say, with an ability to cycle up to 75%. Future applications can be varied. Singapore, interestingly enough, is a past master of this stuff. They do it brilliantly, and they market themselves as a city of garden and water. They create what's called new water, which is their reclaimed water. There's firefighting, there's bushfire fighting, and there's sophisticated hydroponics that can reframe the way agriculture works. Israel, for argument's sake, is aiming at 100% use of reclaimed water in making their agriculture and greening the desert. And in fact, they now export greens to the EU. Underneath all of these schemes, Singapore, the REMS scheme, and Israel was an absolute commitment to quality information and ongoing public education. There are, of course, challenges to all of this, and we've just been talking about them, whether it's PFAS, whether it's estrogen, whether it's all sorts of stuff that gets into the river system. No one is immune, not anywhere. It's everywhere. It's all over the catchments. We can't take it. We've simply done too much. So what does that mean? We either live in a bubble and pretend it doesn't exist, or get on and do something about it. And we have to address these issues, and we can be a bit like the dairy farmers at Shoalhaven. We have to be resourceful, smart, courageous, and adaptable. Our challenge, then, is to utilise both combination of science, technology, hybrids, natural systems, and do what we can do now. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, today's a gift, and that's why it's called a present. Our challenge then is to turn that environmental liability and let it become an urban asset. So thank you. I ask you all to have a look at the scheme down at Shoalhaven, just around the corner. And it really is an extremely important thing that is a great potential protector to the river systems and all about it. So thanks very much.